slippery and greasy, and it was just a horrible, horrible mess.
And I told you, you have to start with the soap first, and then you move on to the other stuff.
Hey, we're live.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Live here on Keystroke Medium. I am Josh Hayes here with my co-host Ralph Kern, and today we are joined by Allan Batchelder, the author of the 4 books in the Immortal Treasury series. We're going to be talking a lot about that today, and he's also got a short story published in the Blackest Nights anthology by C.T. Phipps. So, Allan, welcome to the show, brother.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We actually spent quite a bit of the post show not post showing, and we were talking about Game of Thrones, which is a completely ridiculous topic today. And my goodness. So like what's crazy is like it's not a like, yeah, I liked it, or I didn't like it. It's I loved it and I hate it, and it's just like a vicious
and a little bit of both as well. I'm not sure.
Yeah, exactly.
I finished watching it about the 30 minutes, if that, before the show, and I just spent the intervening time looking at my computer, going, huh?
Yeah, me and my wife were sitting on the couch, just like, so welcome everybody in the live chat. It's been going on for a few minutes now. And if you're listening on the audio feed, make sure you're coming and hanging out with us on Monday nights and Thursdays for our live show. If you're watching for the first time on YouTube, welcome and thank you for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and like. And there's Scott on time as always. Look at him.
Oh, I have a good reason. Actually, I don't.
He screeches in, sparks flying.
Yeah, no. I watched episode 5 of Game of Thrones, and then
we were just talking about that.
Then I was decompressing with some Graham Norton. So,
we need to get a Graham Norton over here.
Graham Norton is hilarious. I love it.
We love Graham. Do you have the big red chair over there as well?
Oh yeah, the big red chair. The big red chair stories are what the best part is.
Maybe I should get one of those and like put it back here. I can sit on it during the show.
You know, have you seen the big red chair and why there's? Oh, you've seen that? The reason they have the big red chair, and you sell the sex stories, and then they dump you if it's no good.
That's right.
We should get one. We should get one for the live chat audience.
Yeah, I don't think we don't want to hear any of the stories.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, actually.
Well, maybe we
put it like that. I think there's probably some dark horses in there.
Yeah.
That's right. We are.
Let's keep it clean.
We're going to be doing the giveaway tonight, because I meant to do it Thursday and I forgot, like a horrible, horrible show host. We're going to do the giveaway for the Kindles from the Covers for a Cure event that we had a couple of weeks ago. So if you were a bidder or a donator, you are in the eligibility list to receive a Kindle Paperwhite or a Kindle 7, and we'll do that drawing here probably about halfway. We'll see how it goes. And I'm going to throw in some other little cool things with the package as well. So we will get to that later. But for now, let's talk about some epic fantasy books, because that is one of my favorite genres, first of all, and also Game of Thrones is the topic of the week. So it's actually for fortuitous that we're having a fantasy author on the show. So Allan, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in writing.
I have been a professional actor for 30 some years. And so I've been part of stories and telling stories for decades. And I've written stories my whole life, but I never really put them out there until after my mother passed away. I basically thought, it's now or never. So I did the first one, and it was really well received. And I had a larger story in mind, so I just kept rolling with it. Maybe a little out of my mind to start with a 5-book series as my first project. But
just jump in, just go.
But yeah, really. But I know I kind of knew how it ended, even as I was beginning. So, and I'm excited about that. But I am learning from this whole Game of Thrones and Endgame, Avengers Endgame experience, You know, when you make people wait that long, and you're writing the final piece, the payoff just needs to be fantastic. So it's a daunting task. I'm intimidated.
You know, it's one of those things where like Scott and I went and watched Endgame together, and we walked out of the theater. We had to talk about it for like 3 hours before we could even like process what had happened. And we talked a little bit about Game of Thrones today, and it's kind of like you want to write that ending where
resonates for hundreds of years.
Exactly. And people talk about it and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that's how they ended it, but as a good way, you know. So the Immortal Treasury series, there's 4 books in it right now. You said there's a 5-book planned 5 books. Tell us a little bit about the series. What kind of inspired it and kicked it off?
So I grew up in the 70s watching Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name, and my dad introduced me to Yojimbo, so I was watching the Kurosawa movies and all the Bruce Lee. But I also had a background in the classics like Odysseus in the Odyssey, and I wanted to create just a kind of a man monster who doesn't really know what his own background is, doesn't really know who he is, but he is just a one-man wrecking ball, you know, destroying everything in his path. I guess it was partially inspired by all the Conan books too that I read. I read them as a kid. My dad would read them, and then he'd toss them aside, and you know, to be like that. And they had the coolest covers. Remember the Frazetta covers? And
Frazetta is awesome.
Yeah. So, well, I got one of those for my book 5 cover. Felix Ortiz did the cover, and when you guys see it, you'll know what I'm talking about. But I just wanted to write something like that, and it's been really, really fun, and it's been great to kind of try to draw in some of the Game of Thrones fans and be a part of this genre called grimdark, where there are no happy endings, really. You know, to me, it's more reflective of life. You know, you were talking about, before we even started the show, you were talking about, well, it's real life. Well, it's not really real life. It's Game of Thrones, but it feels like real life. It has the authenticity of real life. Because bad things not only happen to good people, bad things happen to all people.
And nobody's good all the time or bad all the time. And, you know, it depends on your perspective. Who's the good guy and who's the bad guy.
Right. Yeah.
Depending on which side you're on.
So that's what I loved about those Clint Eastwood Man with No Name movies. Like, he was just this ruthless, you know, gunslinger, but you couldn't always, you know, pigeonhole him into the hero role or the villain role.
I absolutely love that the line on your blurb where it says the Reaper, who's your protagonist. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, Vickers, and he's collected a legion of enemies. He's cut the bloody swath through the greatest of heroes and villains. It's like none of these matter to him. He's the dogs are finally had the day.
He's sort of a berserker in a way, just a killing machine. But he's also, he doesn't know it, but he's a pawn in a much, much larger sort of game that's going on. And I can say that because I started writing this thing in 2012. And a lot of people say it reminds them, the writing reminds them of Nicholas Eames. But again, I started doing this in 2012. So I've been doing it a long time.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you, when you first started talking about it, you said that you had the ending in mind when you first started writing the books. Has that ending changed at all, or has it kind of affect? I mean, obviously, it's going to affect how you write the books, but as you write the books, obviously, things happen that you don't expect, and characters do things that you're like, no, I don't want you to do that. So, has your ending stayed where you thought it was going to be?
It's become harder to there's so many sub characters, you know, so many different story threads and things, and you want to honor all of those. But maybe it's the end of Elric I'm thinking of, but it's, you know, at the end of the whole Elric saga, it's like the end of the world, you know. Or if you're familiar with Wagner's Ring Cycle, you know, it has to do with the old Norse gods, sort of, and Siegfried and the Valkyries, and it literally ends. The last opera is called "The End of the World," Götterdämmerung, so Twilight of the Gods or something. But it has to be. That's how you complete the cycle.
Yeah.
Achilles dies, right?
Yeah. Well, in the end, I used to, the Elric books, the Michael Moorcock books, are some of my favorites. Some of the stuff I grew up on, and the last couple of scenes in there I know exactly what you're talking about. There's a whole scene with it because the sword is a sentient being.
Yes.
It winds up turning on him at the end, and yeah.
Well, that's the other thing too. I mean, that is the fantasy sword. You can say whatever you want
Stormbringer.
about Gandalf's sword, but Stormbringer is the ultimate fantasy sword.
It is the ultimate fantasy weapon.
Maybe, yeah. I was going to say maybe followed by Anomander Rake's sword in the Malazan series. I don't know if you're familiar with that by Steven Erikson, but there's an entire world inside of the sword.
Yeah, I haven't read the whole series, but I'm vaguely familiar. Not as familiar as I am with Moorcock stuff, but
yeah. That's kind of what I was shooting for. It's more of paying homage to these great authors. Never hoping to be amongst your number, but wanting to do justice to the beautiful stuff they created and how inspiring it can be throughout your life as a reader.
Oh yeah.
Do you have any one author that you think is your favorite, or where you pulled your most of your inspiration from?
Wow, that is really hard because I think as you mature as a reader, you develop different tastes. Like I went through a crazy Steven Erikson phase where I read it's a 10-book series, the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and they're
big. They're huge books too.
Each book is like 300,000 words. I mean, they're just monstrous. During that time, I was also reading all of the George R.R. Martin books, and when you're younger, you start out with The Hobbit, and you work your way through the Lord of the Rings and all of Feist. I mean, there's too many names to mention, really.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is, in the last few years, I've made so many new friends who are also fantasy authors. So I'm being introduced to all of their stuff, and it's just never ending.
So what made you want to write?
I don't know. I've used to write all the time as a little boy, even just little stories, and the stories got longer and longer, and they were largely satirical. I didn't do much serious stuff until the last 20 years or so, writing plays and writing screenplays, just to kind of serve my background as an actor. And I just had this story I want to tell. Also, I've been a gamer, a D&D player and whatnot since D&D was invented. And so there's always that kind of thinking, I wonder if I could do this, or I wonder what my world would be like and what the rules of magic in my world would be like. Just kind of wanting to tinker from the inside. And I know that a lot of authors like Joe Abercrombie and Nicholas Eames, they're gamers too. So I think that's a natural progression.
So you mentioned the magic and the world building. I'm curious. We like to kind of geek out, as it were, on the characters and the setting of the books that we create. And obviously they're way more personal to us as authors than they ever could be to fans or other authors. So on a 5-book series, obviously you're going to get very close to your characters. You're going to know a lot about them. When you start, though, you might not know what's the main character of your story. Tell us a little bit about him.
So
or her.
Yeah, no, his name is Tarman Vikers, and he's kind of my Conan the Barbarian character. He's not quite as far down the barbarian path, but from the beginning, the first time we meet him, he doesn't really have a sense of who he is beyond the last 2 or 3 years, although there are legends about him. And in order for there to be legends about someone, they have to have been around for a long time. So there's something fishy about him from the very first time we meet him. But he really is mercurial. He's what's the word I'm fishing for when somebody is a brilliant piano player or
virtuoso?
Yeah, he's kind of a combat virtuoso. You know, he's fought so many hundreds of thousands of people over the unknown span of his life that he can virtually anticipate every angle that he could possibly be attacked from, and he just has an amazing bloodlust when he really gets worked up and going, and consequently he gets used by other political entities, kings and queens and emperors and whatnot, as kind of a tool or a pawn in their struggles against each other. And there are a lot of mysteries about the world itself, which is why I don't include a map in the first 4 books. And I can't tell you why, because that's a major spoiler.
Sometimes we
yeah.
need spoilers. We try not to.
Yeah.
We like to
Do you
do
want to
the
tell us?
spoiler, and then we do the spoil warning after.
Well, it's been a secret that's 4 long books in the revealing. So I hope people will find that interesting.
You know, I always find it interesting.
That sounds like fascinating to me. That something you've got something like that you've had running for four books, and that's already piqued my sort of imagination. Is that something you've kind of drip fed the mystery around, or is it a mystery that the reader doesn't even know is a mystery yet, so to speak?
There's a little of both, actually. I've been trying to seed it all the way from the very, very beginning of the first book. Then there are other things that pop up. There are some major twists in the story, and I'm not always a fan of twists, but I think these are pretty organic. And there's one at the end of the second book that is just staggering. And that one was completely spontaneous. I think, you asked me about it before we started taping. And sometimes, you get these weird things out of left field and you go, my God, why does it want to go that way? But you run with it anyway, because that's where the creative juices are. And it can be really fun to let your characters talk and to let fate intervene in its own way.
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned geography as having some pivotal role to play in the novel itself. As soon as you mentioned it, my first thought was Elantris, and in Elantris they have their magic system is based around the geography of their world. And this is a spoiler that I'm going to spoil because it's been out for a while. If you haven't read it, you haven't read it. But Elantris, they draw glyphs, and the glyphs are based on the geography of the world. And then there was this event that happened, which is basically a big earthquake that ruptured, and it created a chasm through the world. And so the glyphs didn't work. None of the magic worked because there was now a line literally through the world. And until they figure that out, once they figure that out and draw the chasm into the glyph, the magic starts working again. And they talk about it the whole book, but you never realize, they talk about the chasm forming and the earthquake and all that stuff, but they never put 2 and 2 together that's why the glyphs work the way they do until they start actually looking at the origin of the glyphs. And so I think that's interesting, talking about geography, how it affects the story.
I mean, maybe I was going to say maybe a more current example would be Hodor. The way you're seeding the mysterious, what the hell does Hodor mean? You're going with this for years. And then when you finally find out, the impact of it is just explosive.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, if you can get a payoff like that, I mean, that's masterful right there.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about, and then going back to the geography thing, I kind of I always get tied up in that because a lot of fantasy is very geography. Geography is always important in fantasy. It seems like the whole with the Game of Thrones, there's in the books, there's all this trying to get through past the fingers or through the neck, or past the wall. There's always some sort of thing that funnels the story one way or another, or going to Mordor in Lord of the Rings, or so on and so forth.
Well, you've got to set the geography almost around the story, or set the story around the geography, haven't you? It's especially in something like that. And I mean, you said that you haven't given a map in the series. Have you actually got a map that you use if it's relevant to your mystery? How does one influence the other?
So there are at least 2 continents in the story, but they're largely and rather mysteriously unaware of each other until the second book. And then, for example, the capital city that most of book 5 takes place in is based on medieval Paris. So it's on an island in the middle of this massive river, but it's many times larger than Ile de la Cité. So there are actual geographical paradigms, and it's kind of what George R. R. Martin did. I think you were hinting at that. So there's the Spanish, in his story, and there are the Germanic peoples, and there are kind of the Italians. I guess that's what Florio is supposed to be. But you do look around the world in which you live sometimes and model your places or your peoples on those things that you see. So who are the Sumerians in your world?
Well, yeah, I think I was an adult before I realized that the Sumerians from Conan weren't was an actual place in history. I had to look that up.
Yeah.
Completely fictional.
So when you went about world building, did a lot of that come natural just through the writing of your book, or did you do a lot of that? I mean, if the geography plays a role in the story, I kind of think you have to do that ahead of time to kind of really understand how it affects the story, or did that just come through the writing?
I was in some small measure, I think I was inspired by Raymond Feist. He has this whole series taking place on one continent, and then about halfway through his works, they discover another Novindus, I think it's called, another continent across the ocean that's kind of sort of like Australia, I guess, in size. And that idea just really intrigued me. What if the people on this main continent that we assumed was the continent is actually not the main continent? There's something larger out there with a whole bunch of people that we don't know anything about. But the collective memory of virtually everyone in the world has been wiped. So I just gave you a major spoiler.
Yes.
Yeah, and that has to... And that really impacts the geography, because there are a lot of things they should know and did know at one point in their history that they don't know right now. They don't know what they don't know.
And
So,
does that feature into your character? Because it seems like your character also has sort of
yes,
probably more than most amongst the others, sort of a sense of amnesia, or...
You're absolutely right, and that's intentional, and there's a very good reason for it, and I think it's a justifiable and organic reason. So I hope it doesn't seem Deus Ex Machina when people are reading it. I mean, when you think about something for 6 or 8 years, you have plenty of opportunity to fill in the gaps.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm curious about your magic system now that you've given this spoiler away on things. Is your book kind of a low magic type where it's hidden away or people have forgot about it, or is it more like a high magic where a lot of people do know magic and it is a kind of a commonplace thing?
No, it's high magic. The thing and I guess this is really what's necessary in most books, is there's a huge penalty for using magic. It's physically agonizing for the people in my world. They call it burning. And so how do you cope with it? Some of them drink to excess. Some of them abuse substances. Some of them kill themselves. Some of them become addicted to the pain of using the magic, because it has to do with consuming these energies. And so there are people who are sensitive to it and can use it, but the common person can't.
Let's take a break real quick and do our show sponsor, Ralph, if you've got it pulled up.
Yeah, I've got it right in front of me. Right, the show sponsor for today, or sponsors, are John Evans and his brother James Evans with the Royal Marine Space Commandos box set. So there's being a box set, there's two stories in there. Publisher's pack contains Commando and Guerrilla, the first two books in the Royal Marine Space Commando series. Commando, a young lieutenant as opposed to lieutenant, a fleet of alien invaders will first contact be humanity's last stand. In his short military career, Lieutenant Warden has already battled insurgent groups, criminal gangs, and intergalactic pirates. When a distant colony sends out a distress signal, he and his fellow space commandos can't wait to transfer their consciousnesses and launch their clone bodies into action. But no amount of enthusiasm could have prepared Warden for humanity's first alien encounter and the ensuing bloodbath. After his captain falls to the attack, Warden feels both pride and fear as he assumes first in command. Outmanned and outgunned, the confident commando must find a way to eliminate the aliens before they slaughter an entire human colony. Will Warden's troops prove that they're made of tougher stuff, or have they finally met their match? And then Guerrilla, the second part in the box set, a ruthless invasion and outmatched colony, a commando's last chance offensive. Lieutenant Warden just barely survived a relentless attack on the New Bristol colony. The Royal Marine Space Commando has orders to defend his post until support arrives. When Lieutenant Warden learns of a nearby enemy base that could wipe out far more than the colony, his mission transforms from protective to suicidal. To save countless lives, Warden must raid an unstoppable enemy and take out one of the most powerful warships in the galaxy. No pressure or anything. Avoiding huge walking tanks and technology far beyond their own, the RMSC has one chance to get this right. Can he pull off the incredible, or losing the battle cost him the war? For Commando and Guerrilla are the first two books in the Royal Marine Space Commando military science fiction series. If you like fast-paced action, interstellar battles, and characters with nerves of steel, then you'll love John and James Evans' thrilling saga. So buy it today.
Of Doom.
Of Doom.
We've got the Doom boys.
Cost them the Battle of Doom. I know. And did you say that's on sale on from Wednesday?
Yeah, it starts Wednesday, and I think it goes for a week. It's on sale for 99 cents.
Okay, excellent.
Let me double check that. Let me make sure that that's accurate. Hold on. I think it is 99 cents, but let me double check. Yeah, 99 cents from the 15th of May until the 21st of May.
Cool. Of Doom.
Of Doom. Okay, so now we're going to do the giveaway for the Kindles. I'm going to do 3 giveaways. We have 2 Kindles. We have 2 Kindle Fires to do. And then I'm going to add in each one is going to get this KSM package, a couple stickers, a signed bookmark from David Estes. And these have so David Estes, we had the show back in season 2, I think.
It's been a bit, yeah.
And he wrote the Fate Mark series, which is coincidentally enough an epic fantasy grimdark series. These
like we planned this.
I didn't plan it at all. These covers on the bookmark are his original covers, but the books have since been recovered, so you cannot get these images anywhere. Pretty cool artwork. I'm sorry about the blurriness. And then of course Tom Edwards poster card we got from him in Vegas. We'll include with each giveaway we'll include one of those packages. So let me share my screen here real quick. There we go. Okay, so we have 19 people up and a random generator to go. These are the people that donated and or bid and did not win in the Covers for a Cure 3 that we did back last month. We ended up raising, what did I say, just over $5,200.
Yep, just about best one yet.
Just over $5,200 for Matt Young and his family. And all right, let's see who gets the Kindle Fire. Number 10. Amethyst Dragon. I got to figure out who that is. I've got the information on PayPal, but I got to figure out what it is. So congratulations, Amethyst Dragon. I will get your information for you. And then let's do the Paperwhite that Jamie Davis donated. Number 16 is Tim Taylor. We'll do the Kindle
Congrats.
Paperwhite here.
Awesome, Tim.
Awesome.
I have one of each. I love them.
Oh yeah, they're great. I have a Kindle. This is the new Kindle Paperwhite.
I've been wanting to get a new one.
The waterproof, some type of flat screen deal. I'm not sure exactly.
You can read it while swimming. Very important.
Yeah, underwater actually.
That's right. I'm gonna do my swim laps
Because the lighting is so good underwater.
Or if you want to read the sharks,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Not
It might
recommended.
be the only thing that saves you.
Please consult a shark expert before reading to sharks. We don't advocate that on this show.
We do not advocate reading a book to sharks while you're swimming.
Disclaimer alert.
Yeah. Well, I think it might be the first disclaimer we've ever made on the show because we made some other hokey claims about what this show will do for your, health and stuff.
Do not take your Paperwhite into shark-infested waters. Keystroke Medium said so.
Terms and conditions apply.
Yeah, you probably just saved a life right there, Josh. Good job.
They might enjoy Jaws,
That's right.
Yeah, I was
You
reading
can read
Jaws.
it while watching Jaws. You can read it. So thank you to Jamie Davis for supplying the Kindle Paperwhite, and then also thank you to Guy Anthony DeMarco for the Kindle 7 HD, which is Alexa equipped, and Guy's in the live chat. So thanks, Guy.
Alexa, play Keystroke Medium.
Yeah,
That's what you tell it.
and of course everybody else that donated and bid on the covers next year. Hopefully we'll be able to do it even bigger, and we're always grateful for everybody's participation. So good times. All right, so let's move into the second half of the program tonight, which is talking about process, and I think we've kind of covered a little bit of it, but one of the things that I'm interested in, because I am an outliner, is because of the 5-book series and because you had the ending already thought out for this series. Are you a pantser? Are you a plotter? And did you do a lot of outlining notes before you started writing? Talk us a little bit about that.
So I took some writing classes when I was back writing plays, and one of the things one of my teachers said to me was, you shouldn't write from on high. And what he meant from that is you're like a god and you're controlling every last little, because it leaves out those sort of organic epiphanies that you have or can have when you're writing. And so I typically know how every book begins and every book ends, and a few little guideposts along the way. But a lot of things I discover, there's some of my favorite moments in the entire series were things that came out of nowhere. I typed them before I even knew what I was doing. And I went, what the hell does that mean? But you follow it, you go down that path and you discover great things. And I guess I'm more of a pantser. I trust myself enough to do that. And I also don't want to be over controlling with my story. There's a major, as I said, twist at the end of book 2 that came out of nowhere. And it might be one of the best parts of the whole series for me as a writer. So the answer is mostly pantsing, but I do always know the beginning and the end and a few of the highlights.
And so these books they're grimdark. So I guess they don't technically have to be like big epic tomes, but when you start out, do you have kind of an area of word count in mind that you're trying to hit with these books, or do you just kind of find an organic ending to the book and then continue on to the next one?
I wrote the first one, and then I sort of modeled the ensuing ones after that. I said, I guess that's the neighborhood that I want to go in. I'm getting close to the end of the first draft of book 5, and it might end up being longer just because trying to estimate so many weeks or months out how long the final battle is going to take, for example, is challenging. So, but I have a range in mind. I don't want to write one of those 300,000 word, books. That's not my style.
What are they typically now? What are the
Mine
first books you run?
Mine are like 135, 140, which is still a pretty long book. Yeah. It's right in there with a lot of the Lord of the Rings books.
And go ahead, Ralph.
Now, I was just going to ask, one of the things I found curious on your bio is you're a former stand-up comedian.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, that sounds too overly challenging. Does that add anything to sort of your dialogue or anything like that? Because comedians have to have a
studies
centered timing, don't they?
Well, I think it does, really, because in every story of any magnitude with all these characters, you're going to have your share of idiots and imbeciles and people who are just drunk, at any point in the story. Yes.
sounds like an average episode of
Yes, as they bumble their way along the narrative. And I also think you need a little comic relief. I've talked about this elsewhere, but in Macbeth, right after Macbeth and his wife kill the king, out comes the porter and he does like 5 minutes of dick jokes. I'm totally serious. It's the goriest scene, and then the porter comes out and talks about how alcohol makes you impotent, but when you're not drunk you can get a woody and blah blah blah.
So there's a precedent.
And who someone said that Shakespeare was a hack, though.
Yeah.
No. Well, you asked me earlier my inspirations, and I've just, since I was a little boy, we used to go to Shakespeare religiously, and I've woven him into all of my stories. The second title is actually based on a quote from King Lear. So yeah, I love Shakespeare.
I don't know that I've actually ever read a Shakespeare play.
I haven't.
That's because you're a Philistine.
Well, to be fair, reading it is not the same as seeing it live.
Yeah.
You really have to see it live to understand it. I don't think he wrote it with the intention of having people trapped in a classroom,
Well, I took one class where I had to read some Shakespeare. They always would recommend it, pick like the plays to watch on video because we couldn't go see one actually. And they'd say, read it and then watch it and it'll be better.
Yeah.
Yeah. It'd be neat to see an actual live performance. So that would be cool.
I might even do it the other way around. I might watch it first and then read it.
Yeah. And I think that's probably what I did actually. Because for time.
Ralph mentioned the stand-up comedy thing, but also you mentioned that you were a professional actor, and I think a lot of stuff that I have seen in both traditional and indie markets is just dialogue that's just completely stilted and it's not natural, and it's one of the harder things I think for authors to get right and to make it real. How much did you pull from that, and were you able to take some of those different characters and then give them really different, unique voices because of the training you had?
Yeah. Well, as I said, I started out writing plays and screenplays, and as an actor, you're constantly talking to yourself, when you're on the set, trying to get the sound right. You're trying to get making lines that you've rehearsed forever and memorized sound completely spontaneous. And actually, that's the trick for stand-up comedy too, by the way. Robin Williams was heavily rehearsed, but it's making it's a magic trick. It's making it look like you just thought of it. Like it's totally spontaneous. So I say almost all of my dialogue out loud, inadvertently, probably driving along, in the shower, walking the dog, what have you, just trying to get that lilt. I do know a bit. Can
I just say that I was just looking at your the sneak preview, and the thought of you walking your dog, saying you may strike him once, however you like, but if the blow is the one that kills him.
yeah. Well,
I think there's some you say in the shower, and there's some you say when walking the dog as well. I'm getting that.
Well, actually, if you get a chance to listen to the preview of my my Audible book, I got British actor Christopher Selby to do it, and he does the whole gang in like 5 or 6 different British dialects. So you've got like a Welshman arguing with a guy from Yorkshire arguing with somebody from. It's just hysterically funny. It's like watching Red Dwarf or something.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Dear, but eternal fan from here on out.
Yeah.
I'm a massive fan of Red Dwarf.
Yeah. Well, I didn't put Smeggy in my novel yet, but or Smeghead.
You need to.
And Blackadder, of course. I did put my books too are full of little Easter eggs, and nobody ever finds them. It's a little frustrating, but I put one little line reference to Blackadder in one of my books, and Edgar Allan Poe and Lewis Carroll, and even computer games. It's just little. So if you're somebody who is into the gaming or the fantasy culture, you'll get all kinds of nice little nuggets out of nowhere.
When you actually sit down and do the writing, that you have a little bit of an outline, you kind of know what you're doing, so you're sitting down and kind of just looking at a blank page and going, what's a typical day look for you? Like, do you have multiple characters and you sit down with one character for a little while to go with that character, or do you jump back and forth? What's your normal?
No, and I know that some people hate multiple perspectives, but these are massive world spanning, so I'd probably have 20 or so characters, and I just kind of know whose turn it is next. I'll say, well, we haven't heard from the Emperor lately, so or we haven't heard from Vikers lately, so I sit down with them and I kind of know which direction they need to go, and I'm constantly going back and looking, and I'm saying, well, we need an update on this character. It's been too long since we've heard from this other character. But they all get their turn, and I don't go on for chapters and chapters on one character. It's I'll do several pages on a character and then move to somebody else.
Do you have their individual arc in mind, or is that again something where you kind of see where they go?
I do. I know where they started, and I know where they're going to end up. And again, along the way, I discover all kinds of interesting things about them. And sometimes they end up, you asked me this earlier, but sometimes they end up in a different place than I had anticipated. And that has to be okay. Otherwise, it'll look forced. You were talking about the ending of Game of Thrones and how certain people met their demise. And, you have to allow it to be what it wants to be. You can't say, oh, Cersei has to end on the throne and be surrounded by adoring admirers. It's that nobody will buy that.
Well, and I think a lot of people, when they get into a series, especially in Grimdark, they kind of understand it's probably not going to have a happy ending. Whereas like Lord of the Rings, you mentioned, has a happy ending, and people go and
most people get through it.
Right. Well, that's just it. I mean, after the Red Wedding, the Rains of Castamere, how can anybody imagine this is going to end well?
Well, yeah, or even earlier than that. When I read the Game of Thrones, the first book, and Ned Stark got killed, I was like, what the fuck is going on here?
Yeah,
I thought he was the main character. He's going to be the main character for the whole series, and now he's got his head chopped off.
Yeah, and I was really angry, and I loved it. I was like, what the hell?
It made it real, because now every character that stepped out there, you're like, oh, this character is in dire peril.
Yeah. Stephen Erickson does the same thing in his books. The moment you fall in love with somebody is the moment they're doomed.
Yeah, that's your.
I remember my wife didn't start watching Game of Thrones until season 7 was probably like a quarter of the way through, and she started seeing Dany riding the dragon, just like blowing everything away on the dragon. She's like, oh, I really like Dany, I want to watch that. So we went back and started over. Well, we were about 3/4 of the way through season 3. Is that the Red Wedding? Is the end of season 3?
Is it
season 4?
4, I think, isn't it?
4. No, it is 3, I think.
You might be right.
Whichever way. We're
going to watch it right now and find out.
Yeah. We were
all right, live keystroke watching
and
of all the
So we were like 2 episodes away from the Red Wedding, and the whole time it's coming, I'm like, oh God, I know it's coming. Well, Jamie goes, I really like Rob. I think he's my favorite character of the entire series. And I go, don't do that. Don't do that. And then when the whole time like the whole thing was building up and we were laying in bed watching it, and I kept like looking at her out of the corner of my eye, like knowing what was happening. And then when it started happening, she was like, I couldn't sleep for like 2 days. I was just, it was fun watching
you.
Yeah, I should have recorded it is what I should have done. I should have recorded it and had like
Instagram.
I still like that photo Jamie posted of you after, was it the Battle of Winterfell?
Yeah.
Where you just stood in front of the TV.
Night. Oh yeah.
You just stood in front of the TV and go, huh?
But I mean it's good writing, right? For good or for worse, like we said. Like I can't remember
what you want out of your story.
When we were alive, or if we were doing it during the post show. But you craft a story and a narrative with characters that people follow and then really are involved with.
So can I just ask Alan a question? So when you read. Well, this is a strange interview. So, on your on the product pages, it looks like it's sort of quite a focused perspective. But you say it's more of an ensemble kind of cast, is it, than perhaps suggested with the blurbs?
Yeah, the whole world is involved. Vikers is certainly the central character. He's the first and the last that we're going to encounter in the story, but there are other people who have parts to play in the same way that Sam Gamgee or Gamgee plays in the Lord of the Rings. He's Frodo's trusty friend and servant, and his role is tremendously important, even though he's not a ring bearer.
Or is he?
Yeah.
Okay, that's an interesting sort of hint there, I think, of something going on.
One of Scott's favorite questions, and I'm going to steal it from him.
Ask it. Do it.
We talked about the main character a little bit, but what's your favorite side character, or secondary character that you write?
Wow, that's tough. I do have a guy who's the village idiot. When we first meet
we have one of those.
Is his name Josh?
No, but he does have a single syllable name, so maybe there's the connection.
Yeah, could be Scott.
No,
could be Ralph.
So the village idiot character.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, the village idiot character turns out to be he has a massive character arc, and he turns out to be pretty extraordinary. But also there's a character who's a gigolo when we first meet him.
His name is definitely Ralph.
No,
I wish.
Yeah, it's Long Pete, actually.
Nice.
Oh yeah, that's good. I like that.
Yeah,
not like Littlefinger, but the complete opposite.
Yeah. So, but I also have tons of female characters and main role female characters. I based one on Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. So she's this old, cynical, sarcastic, incredibly powerful queen, and nobody in this entire world is who they seem to be. That's I guess another aspect of the story that is.
So it's not the Blackadder Elizabeth I.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
But that's what makes the characters interesting too, is to kind of find out who they really are, and you get your first impression, but then you got to develop into the character arc and
right.
And so
yeah.
forth.
Well, that's what's great about Jaime Lannister, isn't it? I mean, you go, oh man, he's having children with his sister. How disgusting! How perverse! And by the middle of season 6, you're in love with the guy.
I think one of the most powerful things they did with this last episode was 2 of the most reprehensible characters in the entire show. And Jamie kind of had a redemption arc along the way, but I mean, first thing he did was toss a little boy out of a window.
Yeah, who hasn't? I mean,
Yeah,
right,
you-
right.
you've all wanted
While he's boning his sister, right? and Cersei is pretty much the most evil person you could meet. Well, maybe with the exception of what's his nuts. It gets
the Sparrow.
Theon up.
No, the at the flayed man, the people that
Yeah,
did it.
yeah.
What's his
Oh
name?
yeah.
And it's much worse in the
Ramsay.
books.
Ramsay.
Ramsay. Bolton.
Ramsay in the books is
Craster's
way-
pretty bad.
Craster's
Craster's
Crash
pretty
is
bad.
pretty bad, yes.
Yeah.
But anyway, my point was that you take two of the most reprehensible characters that you would look at in real life and go, "You're a freaking monster." And during their scene at the end of this episode, spoilers. During their scene at the end of the episode, my wife and I were actually like concerned, like we felt like genuine empathy for what they were going through in that moment. And it's crazy that, you know, through this whole series, you hate Cersei, and then through just a certain, like just a small line and the words that they say between each other, you just feel some really real empathy for the two characters. I think that's really powerful. It says a lot about the writing. It says a lot about the characters too as they go through their journey. And I love characters like that. All the my favorite books that I've ever read or watched have had like just ridiculously well drawn out characters.
I love what has become a trope now of starting a character by them doing something utterly unforgivable.
Yeah.
I think the first time I saw it where it was really impacted was Vic Mackey from The Shield.
Oh yeah.
I still haven't seen The Shield. I need to watch it.
It starts off and he does something utterly unforgivable. And no matter what he does throughout the rest of the series, nothing he can do can redeem that. But you know, you find him growing on you, and especially as a cop, I was like, I don't want him to grow on me. You know, he's just foul, but still, you kind of root for him at times.
You know,
go ahead.
I was going to say The Shield was probably the first. I think Game of Thrones, that like the book actually came out before The Shield did, but for TV shows, that The Shield was actually probably the first really major tragedy that actually was extremely popular, because even at the end, he doesn't have a redemption arc. Like he's still an asshole at the end of the show, even more so than he was at the beginning of the show. But because he was that anti-hero, people really liked the show, and a lot of people didn't like how it ended.
What's the meth cook one?
Breaking Bad.
Breaking Bad.
Yeah, and then there's Ray Donovan, you know, does a similar thing. Ray Donovan is, if you really...
Godfather.
Yeah. Well, have you guys read Richard III by William Shakespeare?
Yeah. Well, if you go back, I remember when I first started reading George R. R. Martin, and I'm pretty sure there's some really heavy parallels in the entire story, and even the geography of Game of Thrones between the War of the Roses.
Well, yeah,
which is a real historical. You read that nonfiction, and it reads a lot like the Game of Thrones, and how, you know, it's
even
pretty nasty.
Even the names, right? I mean, House Stark, House of York, Lannister is Lancaster, so it's all the, you know, it's straight up War of the Roses. Yeah,
it makes it for a fascinating nonfiction read if you ever want to listen to some of those. The Plantagenets came before the War of the Roses.
Yeah,
London was more of a you know, a seat of power, which was, you know, other houses from far and wide sought to dominate. So like King's Landing in itself wasn't a particular source of power, but you had to hold King's Landing stroke London to be in power, which was it's an absolutely similar parallel. But,
well, Guy Anthony DeMarco says The Sopranos was another one that they kind of
The Sopranos.
And I've actually I've watched, I think,
like
all
of The Sopranos.
I've watched all the seasons except for the last season. I never watched the last season, and then I probably should, just so I can feel the
probably what we've learned lately is a lot of people, unless you're really strong constitution, should never watch the last season of any favorite series, unless you can take the pain.
It's like,
as a British comedy fan, Alan, Red Dwarf, Rimmer, he started off as an asshole and he just became worse.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, it's like, I think everybody should do what Stephen King did at the end of the last Dark Tower book, where Roland walks into the tower and then it cuts and then it goes to an author's note, and King's like, okay, nothing good is going to happen beyond this point. If you want to stop now, you're good, but don't read the rest of it, because this is the happy ending that you're going to get. The ending I'm going to give you next, which is the real ending, is not happy and you're not going to like it, so don't read it. Well, then of course you go and read it and you're like, oh. I think everybody should do that. Just stop it before it ends and then tell people not to read anymore.
Yeah, but we need that catharsis, right? We need to be able to mourn the end of the world, as it were.
Right. Exactly. So now that we've talked about a whole bunch of epic endings and ways not to do it, are you very nervous about how the ending of your books are going to work out?
You know, I was cranking one per year, and this last one's taken me almost 3 years. Just that and the political climate, you know, in this country, and I mean, my life's just been sucked down a black hole. But I want to get it done. The fans have been asking for it, and I want to move on to other novels and stories.
It's hard to end this. Ending a book's hard. Ending a series is 5 times as hard in this case, probably.
Yeah, and this is my firstborn too, so it's going to be sad to say goodbye. But if I'm going to grow at all, I gotta finish it and move on to new stuff.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you said you've been at it since 2012. Yeah. So to be involved with characters intimately for for 7 years.
Yeah, you literally think about them like the last thing before you fall asleep. You know, you're as you're dozing off, you're thinking about dialogue between, you know, the two adversaries, or some ridiculous scene where a guy is trapped in an outhouse, you know, and it seems like Shakespeare, and then when you wake up in the morning, you can't remember any of it. It's
yeah, I always have those moments where I have a thought and I'm like, oh, that's really good.
The most brilliant thing I've ever thought of. I better
never forget it.
No, but see what I do is I try to convince myself I'm going to remember it. I'm not going to pick, as sometimes I'll be on my phone and whatever. And I'm like, all right, I'm done with my phone. I'm setting it down on the charger. I'm done with my phone now. I'm just going to lay in the darkness. And like 2 minutes later, ding, light bulb comes on. And I'm like, nope, I'm going to remember it. I'm not going to grab my phone. I'm going to remember it. And then I reach over and grab my phone and write it down. I'm like, oh, every time.
I've got like a little, probably like everyone in the notepad function. I've got 2 stories. I had dreams, and you wake up and you think that's a brilliant dream. But I also know that
sometimes it's just a beaver wrestling.
I'll only remember the dream for a day or so. And so I've like woken up in the middle of the night, written down what my dream is, because I thought it was the best story ever. and then okay, it's a bit of crap.
then you pick up a piece of paper and you say, Josh is a gigolo in an epic fantasy story. That's weird.
Or you go, what is sentient?
I'm in a little gingham dress.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to post them. I'll root them out and I'll post them on the keystroke because they're hilarious. Because like you wake up and you think they're brilliant, and then you have a look at them, and a couple of days later you're like, what is that shit?
I do that stuff sober.
I think it was Terry Brooks or somebody I'd read about years ago that said they didn't write down those ideas because they said if they were good enough, then they would last until the story was ready to be written. I'm not sure I believe that. It's kind of reckless, but maybe there's something to that.
Well,
I'm not that brave at all.
Supposedly, Paul McCartney dreamed the yesterday, the song, and I've also heard that what's her name, the woman who wrote Mary Shelley, dreamed Frankenstein, right?
It was a shellfish. It was shellfish poisoning, wasn't it? That she had. And there is a bit more of a story going on about it. But,
what that Mary Shelley had when she wrote Frankenstein?
Yeah, that she had a dream. But you're saying it was poisonous shellfish inspired.
Yeah.
Wow.
Interesting.
Could be. Never know.
Not going to try that, but sounds.
Yeah, let's avoid that. Again, not something we're going to endorse here at Keystroke Media. No swimming with sharks, no eating poisonous shellfish. Just don't do it.
Public safety advisories.
It could be one hell of a win, but you're probably going to lose.
Well, let's see here.
Kind of like one of those ideas. I was going to give a brief example, and I thought, no, I can't.
No. This is where we rein it in.
Let's see. What do we got going on this week? We have on the writer's journey on Thursday, we have author business success with Joe Solari with Kayleen and Lauren Moore on Thursdays. Kevin J. Anderson will be on the show next Monday. That'll be a fun show.
Awesome.
That's the first time I think he's been on. And then he's coming right back like 2 weeks later on writer's journey, I think. Let's see. We got Richard White coming on Thursday after next for avoiding publisher scams. And then Josh Erickson will be on the show next 2 Mondays from now. So we've got a really good lineup coming. June is packed. July is pretty much packed. And we're starting to book for August now. So we've got a really fun summer ahead of oh wow, and the writer's journey is even booked out all the way through the end of June. So
yeah, I had a big talk with Joe Solari, and he is an extremely smart guy about the business of writing, and I would highly recommend people check out his show. So
I'm really interested to watch that one. All right, so I'm gonna put a link in the live chat. It'll be in the show notes as well. These are all of Allan's books. Please go pick them up and give them a read. Any estimation on when the 5th book is going to come out?
I think it's going to be out. I was shooting for July 20th, my son's birthday, but it's definitely going to be out before summer's over. I promise that. And when you guys see the cover for book 5, you're just going to be amazed. It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Awesome. I can't wait to share it.
Sweet.
I love book covers. I actually got I got a proof for Echoes of Valor, and I showed it to Scott. I'm like, oh, that's a great cover.
Pretty amazing. Especially for a wraparound cover.
That's right. Everybody in the live chat, thank you guys so much for coming and hanging out with us tonight. It's always been a blast. I'll get the show sponsor, Kayleen. Kayleen's asking about the show sponsor link in the chat. I'll get it to you. We have been with Allan Batchelder and talking about his Immortal Treasury series. If you are listening on the audio feed and you haven't come and hung out with us on Mondays or Thursdays, do so every Monday night at 8 p.m. We will be live. And also,
if you don't, terrible things will happen to you. If you don't, the next thing you know, you're swimming with sharks, trying to read your Kindle, and you die. So you really should come on Monday. It's important.
That's right. Okay, so we will head out of here with that. As always, we'll be back next week. Come back, hang out with us. We're going to talk about some reading. We're going to talk about some writing, and of course, everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium. See you
so much.
Peace.